My name is Sloane Merritt, and 3 weeks after my fiancé left me for my younger sister, I stood at their wedding, at the venue I had booked, surrounded by the flowers I had paid for, and my mother handed me a microphone and asked me, in front of 200 guests, to say a few kind words for the happy couple. She thought she was making me perform my own humiliation. She thought I was going to stand there, the gracious jilted sister, and bless the marriage of the man who dumped me and the sister who took him. At the party I had spent $78,000 to throw for myself. My whole family had spent 3 weeks telling me to be the bigger person, to not get in the way of true love, to support my sister, because that's what family does. What none of them had bothered to check, because not one of them had ever once looked closely at anything I did, was whose name was on the contracts. The venue, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer, the open bar they were all drinking from, the 2-week honeymoon to the Amalfi Coast that my sister was bragging about leaving for in the morning. Every single piece of that wedding was a contract signed by me, paid for by me, owned by me. $100,000 of celebration, and every dollar of it ran through one person, the person they had spent my whole life calling, with a little laugh, just the checkbook. So I took the microphone my mother handed me, and I smiled, and I said, actually, I do have a few things to say, and I think everyone here is going to want to hear them. Welcome to the channel where the people everyone treats as a wallet finally remember they're the one holding it. If you have ever been used by the people who were supposed to love you, if they ever mistook your generosity for weakness, stay right here, because this is the story of the most expensive lesson my family ever learned. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every one. To understand how I ended up holding that microphone, you have to understand how I became the checkbook in the first place. And that started long before Chase, long before the wedding, back when I was just the responsible one. I have been the responsible one in my family since before I was old enough to know it was a job. I'm the oldest. My sister Harper is 4 years younger. And from the day she was born, she was the baby, the fun one, the one things came easy to, and I was the other one, the steady one, the one who got the good grades and the scholarships and the part-time jobs and never made any trouble because somebody in the family had to be the one who didn't. My parents, Gloria and Roger, are not bad people exactly. They're just people who found, early, that there was one child they could lean on and one child they could spoil, and they arranged the whole family around that discovery and never questioned it again. I learned my role early, the way children learn the weather of the house they grow up in. When Harper wanted something, she got it, because she was charming and small and the baby, and when she didn't get it, she made the kind of noise that rearranged a room, so the easiest thing was always to give it to her. When I wanted something, I was told we couldn't afford it, or that I was old enough to understand, or that I should set an example. I was 8 years old being told to set an example. I have a memory sharp as glass of being 11. Saving months of allowance and birthday money for a bike, counting it in a coffee can on my bed, and of my mother borrowing it, just for a little while, to cover something of Harper's and never paying it back, and of being told I was so mature for understanding, that Harper was younger and needed more, that I was the strong one. I never got the bike. I got something more lasting. I got the lesson that, in my family, what I had was only ever what hadn't been given to Harper yet, and that my reward for noticing it without complaint was to be called good. That is how you build a checkbook out of a child. You praise her for every withdrawal. You teach her that her worth is what she provides and her love is what she gives up, so early and so steadily that by the time she's grown, she'll hand you her whole life one reasonable favor at a time and thank you for taking it. I became a wealth manager. I help people protect and grow their money, plan their futures, read the fine print of their own lives so the future doesn't blindside them. I'm good at it. I'm good at it because I am careful and thorough, and I read everything, and I do not assume that a thing is fine just because everyone says it's fine. Those instincts made me very good at my job, and it turned out they made me the only person in my family with any money, which is a different kind of job entirely, one nobody hired me for and nobody ever thanked me for. By the time I was 28, I was the family bank. I want to be honest about how that happened, because it didn't happen all at once. It happened the way these things always do, one reasonable favor at a time. I covered my parents' roof when it went. I paid off Harper's car when she got in over her head, and then again the second time. I covered the deposit on her apartment. When my father's truck died, I bought him a new one and called it a birthday gift so he wouldn't feel bad about it. I paid for family Christmases and family vacations and the occasional family emergency. And somewhere in all of it, I stopped being Sloane and started being the resource, the account everyone drew on. And the worst part is I let it happen because being needed felt, for a long time, almost like being loved. If you have ever bought people's approval one favor at a time and called it generosity, you already know the trap I was in. My family had a phrase for it, and they used it the way you'd use a fond little nickname. never once hearing how it sounded. Whenever money came up, whenever something needed paying for, somebody, usually my mother, would wave a hand and say, "Oh, Sloane will get it. She's basically the family checkbook." And everyone would laugh, including me, because that's what you do. You laugh so the table stays comfortable, even when the joke is that the people who love you have quietly reclassified you as a bank account. She's just the checkbook. I told myself it was affectionate. I told myself it meant they trusted me, relied on me, that I was the strong one. It would take losing everything to understand that you cannot be a person and a checkbook to the same people at the same time. They will always, in the end, choose to protect the checkbook over the person, because the checkbook is the part of you they actually need. And then I met Chase, and I handed the checkbook to one more person who saw exactly what I was for. Chase Donnelly was charming in the way that people who have never had to be anything else are charming. I met him at a friend's party 3 years ago, and he was funny and warm and attentive in a way I wasn't used to, because the careful, responsible woman who pays for everything does not get a lot of warmth aimed at her for free. He made me feel interesting. He made me feel chosen. And I, who could read a 40-page financial prospectus and spot the one bad clause buried on page 31, could not read the one obvious thing sitting right in front of me, which was that a man with no money and no direction had just met a woman who solved both of those problems. Chase was between things when I met him, and he stayed between things for the entire length of our relationship. There was always a venture about to happen, a friend's startup he was going to join, a real estate license he was going to get, a business he was going to start once the timing was right. None of it ever happened. What happened instead was that he moved into my apartment, and my expenses became our expenses, which meant my expenses, and I covered him the way I covered everyone, one reasonable favor at a time. I told myself he was finding his footing. I told myself love means support. I was the family checkbook, and I had simply opened a new account. I can tell you the exact moment I should have known and didn't. About a year in, Chase decided he was going to start a business. A coffee roasting thing. He was passionate about it. He talked about it for weeks with the bright certainty of a man who has never once had to make a plan survive contact with reality. He needed startup money, $12,000 for equipment and a lease on a little space. And I, who vet other people's business plans for a living, who can tell you in 10 minutes whether a venture will sink, sat across from the man I loved and did not vet his, because I wanted so badly for him to have a thing of his own, to stop being between things, to become a person I could lean on for once instead of the other way around. So I wrote the check, $12,000. There was no coffee business. There was never going to be a coffee business. The money went, over a few months, to a car payment and a weekend in Miami with his friends and a watch I later saw on his wrist and pretended not to recognize. When I gently asked about the roaster, the lease, the plan, he got wounded. He said I didn't believe in him. He said it was hard to build something with someone always looking over your shoulder with a calculator, and I apologized. I apologized to him for asking where my $12,000 went. That is how far gone I was. I had become so good at being the checkbook that I would apologize to the people spending me. The thing about being everyone's provider is that it hides who they are. You never find out whether someone loves you or loves what you give them, because you never stop giving long enough to see what's left when the giving stops. I would find out. 3 weeks before my wedding, I would find out all at once in my own apartment in the worst possible way. But that was still ahead of me. For now, I was a woman in love, writing checks, mistaking the sound of my own money for the sound of being needed. I even paid for my own engagement. I didn't know it at the time, and that's the part that still takes my breath. Chase proposed to me on a rooftop at sunset with a beautiful ring, and I cried, and I said yes, and I thought finally somebody chose me. Months later, going through the credit card statements the way I do, because I am the careful one, I found the charge for the ring. It was on the card. My card, the one I'd given him as an authorized user for emergencies when he was between things. He had proposed to me with my own money. He had bought the symbol of his love for me on a credit card I paid off every month, and I had said yes through tears and thanked him. I didn't even confront him about it. That's how deep the checkbook ran in me by then. I looked at that charge, and some quiet, cold part of me filed it away, and the rest of me decided not to make it a thing, because making it a thing might cost me the one relationship I had, and I had been trained my whole life to pay whatever it cost to keep people from leaving. So I paid for my own ring, and I wore it proudly, and I started planning a wedding. I want you to hold on to that ring, because it comes back. A man who proposes to you with your own money is telling you exactly who he is. I just wasn't ready to read it yet. We got engaged, and I started planning the wedding, And because I am who I am, I planned it correctly. By which I mean I planned it the way I do everything, thoroughly, carefully, with a binder. An actual binder color-coded with every vendor, every contract, every deposit, every payment schedule, every cancellation policy, tracked and tabbed and dated. My friends teased me about the binder. Chase teased me about the binder. Harper, when she saw it, rolled her eyes and said, "Only you could make your own wedding feel like a spreadsheet." And everybody laughed, and there it was again. The checkbook, the calculator, the woman who couldn't even fall in love without an amortization table. Here is the thing about that binder, the thing that mattered more than anyone understood. Because I was the one paying for everything, and because I am careful, every single contract was in my name. Mine, Sloane Merritt. Not Chase's, because Chase had no money and no credit anyone would extend. Not the couple's, because venues and caterers contract with a person, and the person was me. The deposits came from my account. The payment schedules auto-charged to my card. I read every cancellation clause before I signed, because I read every clause of everything, always, because that is the one thing my family raised me to be, and then mocked me for being. Let me tell you what I bought. I'm going to be specific, because the specifics are the whole story. I booked Ardenwood Estate, a vineyard out in the North Carolina countryside, the most beautiful wedding venue in 3 counties, for a Saturday in October. $40,000 for the venue and the catering. I hired the florist Harper had always dreamed of for her own someday wedding. $8,000 in flowers. A band, not a DJ, $6,000. A photographer who books 2 years out, $5,000. The dress, the suits, the rings, the cake, the rehearsal dinner, the welcome bags, the whole machine of a wedding, and I paid for all of it, because Chase had nothing and my parents offered nothing, and that was simply the arrangement. The same arrangement it had always been. Sloane will get it. She's the checkbook. And then the honeymoon. The honeymoon was the one thing that was for me. 2 weeks on the Amalfi Coast, a cliffside villa in Positano, first-class flights, the trip I had wanted my entire adult life and never let myself take because I was always paying for everyone else's everything. $22,000. Booked in my name, my passport, my card. The villa, the flights, all of it, non-refundable to anyone but the person who booked it, which was me. I remember booking it, sitting alone at my kitchen table at midnight because Chase had gone to bed, and feeling, for one moment, like I was doing something just for myself. 2 weeks where I wouldn't be the checkbook. I'd just be a person on a cliff over a blue sea. I'm telling you about every contract and every dollar because 3 weeks before the wedding, my entire family was about to make one catastrophic assumption, that a wedding is a thing that simply exists, floating in the world, available for anyone to use. They were about to learn that a wedding is a stack of contracts, and every contract has a name on it, and the name was mine. Subscribe, because the day they learned it is a day my family will be explaining for the rest of their lives. The bomb dropped on a Tuesday, 18 days before the wedding. I'd come home early from work with a headache, which I almost never did, and that's the only reason I was there to see it. I walked into my own apartment and I heard them before I saw them, my fiancé and my sister, and I will not describe what I walked in on except to say that there was no innocent explanation, there was no misunderstanding, there was no version of it that wasn't exactly what it looked like. Chase and Harper. In my apartment. In the life I was paying for. I stood in the doorway and the whole world went very quiet and very clear, the way it does for me in a crisis. The same clarity I feel when a client's portfolio is melting down and everyone is panicking, and somebody has to be the calm one who sees what's actually happening. I didn't scream, I didn't throw anything. I just stood there and looked at the 2 people I had loved most, the man I was going to marry and the sister I had paid off twice, and I watched them scramble and stammer, and I understood that my life had just ended and another one had not yet begun. It's a strange thing, the mind, in a moment like that. While one part of me was breaking, another part, the trained part, the careful part, was quietly taking inventory, the way it does. It noticed that Harper was wearing a bracelet I'd never seen, expensive, the kind of thing Chase couldn't afford, the kind of thing that gets bought on someone else's credit card. It noticed how unsurprised they both were underneath the panic, how quickly the scramble gave way to a kind of defiant relief, the relief of people who have been caught and are, on some level, glad the hiding is over. It noticed that neither of them said sorry. Not that first hour, not really. Not ever in a way that meant it. The careful part of me filed all of it away while the rest of me stood in the doorway of my own life and watched it burn. And I did not yet know that the careful part, the part everyone mocked, was about to be the only thing that saved me. What came out, over the next terrible hour and the next terrible days, was that it had been going on for nearly a year, most of my engagement. While I planned the wedding, while I booked the villa in Positano at my kitchen table at midnight, my fiancé and my sister had been together, and they didn't want to sneak around anymore. They were, and I want to use their exact word because it became the family's word, in love. Real love, the kind you can't help, the kind that just happens. Chase moved out that week into Harper's apartment, the one I had paid the deposit on. He broke up with me in a 4-minute conversation in which he used the phrase, "The heart wants what it wants," without a trace of shame. And I waited, in the wreckage of it, for my family to show up for me, for my mother to be furious on my behalf, for my father to put a hand on my shoulder, for anybody in my family to say, "What was done to you is monstrous, and we are on your side." That is not what happened. What happened is the real story, and it's worse than the affair. My mother called me 3 days after Chase moved out. I thought she was calling to comfort me. I actually thought, picking up the phone, that I was finally going to hear my mother be my mother. "Sloane," she said, in the warm, reasonable, immovable voice she uses when she has already decided something and is going to walk you to it whether you like it or not. "I know this is hard. I know you're hurting. But I need you to hear me because you've always been the mature one, the strong one, and your sister needs you right now." "My sister needs me," I repeated. "She and Chase didn't choose this. Nobody chooses who they fall in love with. It's nobody's fault. It's just one of those terrible, beautiful things that happens, and I will not have this family torn apart over it. Harper is devastated about hurting you. She cries about it. But she loves him, Sloane, really loves him, and you and I both know that you and Chase had problems. You were always working. You were never really present for him, and maybe if we're honest, this is for the best for everyone." I sat down on my kitchen floor. "Mom, he cheated on me with Harper for a year, in the apartment I pay for. And dwelling on it like that is exactly what's going to make this harder than it needs to be." Her voice sharpened just slightly, the steel coming up under the warmth. "Now, there's something practical we need to discuss, and I need you to be the bigger person here, the way you always are. The wedding." And there it was, the reason for the call, not my heart. The wedding. "Everything's already booked," my mother said, brisk now, moving into logistics, relieved to be off the messy emotional part and onto the part she actually cared about. The venue, the caterer, all of it. It would be insane to waste it, and it's all paid for, and Harper and Chase want to go ahead while everything's in place. The same date, the same venue, it just makes sense. So we were all thinking, since it's already done, they'll just use it. The wedding. And the honeymoon, obviously, no sense letting those tickets go to waste. She paused, and then she said the thing I will hear in my mother's voice until the day I die. "Come on, Sloane, don't make this difficult. You know you've always basically been the checkbook for this family. So just let your sister have her day, and we can all move past this like adults. She's just the checkbook. Let your sister have her day. The day I planned, the day I paid for. The dress, the flowers, the villa over the blue sea. They were going to take the wedding I built for myself and hand it to the woman who took my fiancé, and they were calling it being the bigger person. And the only role they had left for me in my own life was to write the check and step aside and smile. I want to tell you I told my mother off right there on the kitchen floor. I didn't, because somewhere in that phone call, underneath the grief, the cold, clear part of me, the part that reads every clause, the part they made when they turned me into the checkbook, had quietly woken up. And it had a question. A professional question. A question none of them had thought to ask. I said, "You know what, Mom? You're right. Let me think about how to make it work." And I hung up. The phone call was not the end of the pressure. It was the opening bid. That weekend, my mother summoned me to a family dinner, and I understood, walking in, that it was an ambush dressed as a reconciliation, because they were all there. My mother, my father, Harper, and Chase. The 4 of them, at my parents' dining table, arranged and waiting, with a place set for me like I was the guest who needed managing. It was the most surreal hour of my life. They had decided, collectively, that the way through this was to treat the affair as a kind of natural disaster that had happened to all of us equally, a thing nobody could be blamed for, and to move briskly on to logistics. Harper cried prettily and told me she never meant to hurt me, and that she hoped someday I'd understand that she and Chase couldn't help it. Chase sat there and nodded, and at one point had the gall to say he hoped we could all stay close. And my parents ran the meeting like a board session, my mother chairing, my father murmuring agreement, walking me step by step toward the only acceptable conclusion, which was that I would fund and surrender my wedding and smile. When I went quiet, my father, who had said almost nothing, finally spoke up, and what he said is the thing I carry from that table. He looked at me disappointed, and he said, "Sloane, your sister found love. Are you really going to be the kind of person who stands in the way of that over a venue? After everything? You've always been the one who holds this family together. Don't stop now. Holds this family together." He meant pays for it. And then he said it, the family password, the thing that unlocks any sacrifice they want from me. "You've always been the bigger person. You're basically the heart of this family." My mother corrected him, gently, with a little laugh, not even cruel, just honest. "She's basically the checkbook of this family, Roger, and thank God for it." And everyone smiled, and Harper reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and I let her, and I smiled back, and inside the cold, clear part of me that reads every contract finished its calculation and went very, very still. because they had made it a family decision. All four of them at one table had looked at what was done to me and decided together that my role was to pay and step aside. They wanted the whole family involved. Fine, the whole family and 200 guests would be involved in what came next. And then I went and got the binder. I spread the binder out on my kitchen table, the same table where I'd booked the honeymoon, and I did the thing I do best. I read every contract, the venue, the caterer, the florist, the band, the photographer, the cake, the rentals, the bar. And then I read the honeymoon documents, the villa booking, the flights. And as I read, the cold clarity spread through me like warmth, because every single page told me the same thing my family had never once considered. It was all mine. Every contract at Ardenwood Estate was between the venue and Sloane Merritt, not Chase, not Harper, not the Merritt family. Me. The catering contract, mine. The florist, mine, with my signature and my card on file. The band, the photographer, every vendor contracted to me, paid by me, with balances scheduled to auto-charge to my card in the 2 weeks before the wedding. My family thought the wedding was a thing that existed. It wasn't. It was a stack of agreements that belonged to me, and the people in those agreements, the venue and the vendors, were professionals who took direction and payment from exactly one person, the person who signed and paid. Me. And the cancellation clauses, which I had read before signing every one of them because of course I had, were clear. The contract holder could cancel. The contract holder controlled the booking. My sister could no more use my wedding than she could walk into my bank and use my account because we shared a last name. The honeymoon was even cleaner. The villa in Positano and the first-class flights were booked in my legal name, against my passport, non-transferable. Harper could not get on those flights. Harper could not check into that villa. They were mine, fully, completely, and there was not one thing anyone could do about it. I sat there for a long time, in the quiet, with the binder open and the truth of it settling over me. My family had spent 3 weeks telling me to be the bigger person and hand over the wedding, never once realizing that there was nothing to hand over, that the entire thing existed only as long as I kept paying for it, and that the moment I stopped, it would vanish like a soap bubble. They had reduced me to the checkbook so completely that they had forgotten the one thing about a checkbook. The person who holds it decides who gets paid. I could have ended it right there, quietly. I could have canceled everything that night, sent the vendors their notice, let Harper and Chase and my mother discover at their leisure that they had nothing. And part of me wanted to, the tired part, the part that just wanted it over. But they hadn't done it quietly to me. They had done it in my own home over the course of a year, and then they had gathered as a family and decided together that the appropriate next step was for me to fund and then surrender my own wedding and smile about it. They had made it a family decision. They had made it public, at least within the family. And I decided, sitting at that kitchen table, that if they wanted the whole family involved, then the whole family and all 200 guests could be there for the part where they found out who the checkbook really was. I called the venue first, not to cancel, not yet. I had a different plan, and it required patience, and patience is the one thing a careful woman has in abundance. Here is what I did over the next 2 weeks, and I did all of it alone because there was no one in my family to help me and I had stopped expecting there to be. First, I let them believe they had won. This was the hardest part and the most important. I called my mother back and I told her, in a small, sad, defeated voice, that she was right, that I didn't want to tear the family apart, that I would be the bigger person, that Harper could have the wedding and they could use the honeymoon, and I just wanted everyone to be happy. I could hear the relief and the triumph in my mother's voice, and underneath it, the faint contempt, because nothing confirms a person's low opinion of you like your willingness to be treated exactly as low as they think you are. She actually said, "I knew you'd come around. You've always been the sensible one." Harper texted me a paragraph of tearful gratitude with too many heart emojis. Chase, unbelievably, sent a thumbs up. They moved into my wedding like it was an inheritance. Harper, I heard, was getting the dress altered to fit her. They kept my date, my venue, my vendors, my flowers, all of it, and added 200 guests, and not one of them ever contacted a single vendor to change a contract or a payment, because why would they? It was all handled. The checkbook had handled it. The checkbook always handled it. What they didn't know was what I was doing quietly, professionally, in the background, the same way I manage a portfolio. I did not cancel anything in a way they could see. Instead, I let the bookings stand and I let the deposits ride, because the deposits were already spent and I wanted the wedding to look completely real, completely on, right up until the moment I chose. But I changed the things that mattered. I moved my payment methods. I rescheduled the auto charges for the final balances, the tens of thousands still owed to the venue and caterer and band, so that they would not process. I spoke privately and professionally with the venue coordinator and a couple of the vendors, owner to contract holder, and I made arrangements about exactly what would happen. And when, on the day, all of it within my rights as the person whose name was on everything. I am not going to pretend that was a fun set of phone calls for them, but professionals understand contracts. And the contract was with me. And the honeymoon, I simply rebooked. I called the airline and the villa, and I changed the reservations from 2 travelers to 1. Me, I kept my window seat over the Atlantic and my cliffside villa over the blue sea, and I quietly removed the man who had proposed to me with my own money from the trip he assumed he was taking with my sister. They were going to drive to the airport after the wedding, believing 2 first-class seats to Italy were waiting for them. There would be 1 seat. It would be mine. I would already be gone. I also did one more thing. I took off the ring. The beautiful ring he'd bought with my money. And I did not give it back, and I did not throw it away. I put it in my bag because I had a use for it, and because some debts deserve to be collected in person. 2 weeks of being the gracious, defeated, bigger person. 2 weeks of my family congratulating themselves on how well they'd handled me. And then the Saturday in October came, my wedding day, my sister's wedding day, and I put on a beautiful dress, not white, a deep wine red, and I drove out to Ardenwood Estate to give my family the day they had earned. If you have ever had to smile and wait while people who wronged you walked confidently toward a cliff they couldn't see, you know the strange calm I felt on that drive. Hit subscribe because we're about to arrive at the wedding. Ardenwood Estate is breathtaking in October. I should know. I chose it and I paid for it. The vineyard was turning gold, the long tables I'd selected were set under the oaks. The $8,000 of flowers I'd ordered spilled down every surface, exactly as I'd designed them for my own wedding, now serving my sisters. 200 guests in their best clothes. The band I'd hired warming up. The whole beautiful machine I had built, humming along, and at the center of it, my sister Harper in a white dress she'd taken in, and Chase in a suit, glowing, accepting congratulations, and my parents moving through the crowd like the proud hosts of an event they had not contributed a single dollar to. I arrived quietly and I watched for a while from the edge. Nobody quite knew how to look at me. Some of the guests knew the story, I could tell, by the way their eyes slid away. These were largely my friends and my extended family, people who had been invited to my wedding and simply had the names of the people at the altar changed on them. A few of them came up to me with careful, pitying faces and asked if I was okay, if I was sure I wanted to be there, and I smiled and said I wouldn't miss it for the world, which was true. More true than they knew. My mother found me before the ceremony. She looked me over, the wine-red dress, my calm, and she decided, the way she always decided, that I was handled. "Sloane," she said, taking my hands, performing warmth for the watching guests. "I am so proud of you for being here. I know it isn't easy. This is what family does." And then, because my mother can never resist gilding a thing until it breaks, she had her idea. "You know what would mean so much if you said a few words during the toasts, just something gracious to show everyone there's no hard feelings, to show this family is united. Would you do that for your sister?" She wanted me to perform my own humiliation as the centerpiece of the evening. She wanted the gathered guests to watch the jilted sister bless the union and prove that the Merritts had handled it all so maturely. She was handing me a microphone to complete my erasure. I looked at my mother, and I felt the last thread of something snap, cleanly, painlessly. "I would love to say a few words," I said. The ceremony happened. I sat in the second row where my mother put me, and I watched the man who proposed to me with my money marry the sister who'd been with him for a year while I planned this exact day, under the flowers I chose, and I felt nothing but a deep, level, almost peaceful patience. The patience of a woman who has read all the way to the end of the contract and knows how it turns out. They said their vows. They kissed. Everyone applauded. We moved to the reception under the golden oaks, and the wine I had purchased was poured, and the food I had paid for was served. And after the first course, my mother stood up, tapped her glass, and beamed at the crowd. "Before we go on," she said, "my older daughter, Sloane, has something she'd like to say. Sloane has been so gracious through all of this, and I think it just shows what this family is made of. Sweetheart?" And she handed me the microphone. I stood up in my wine-red dress, and I looked out at 200 faces, and I waited until the room was completely quiet, the way you wait until everyone is listening before you say the thing that matters. "Thank you, Mom," I said. "I do have a few things to say, and I think everyone here is going to want to hear them, because most of you don't actually know the whole story of this beautiful wedding. So let me tell you." My mother was still smiling, but it had begun to set like something cooling. "My name is Sloane Merritt. Harper is my younger sister. And until 3 weeks ago, the man she just married, Chase, was my fiancé." A ripple went through the crowd, the sound of 200 people sitting up. "We were engaged for a year, and during that entire year, Chase and my sister were together behind my back while I planned my wedding. The wedding you're all sitting at right now." The smiles were gone from the head table. Harper had gone white. Chase was looking at the exits. "I found out 3 weeks ago," I said, calm, clear, carrying, "and I waited for my family to be on my side. Instead, my family told me that I should be the bigger person, that I shouldn't get in the way of true love, and that since the wedding was already booked and paid for, Harper and Chase should just go ahead and use it. My venue, my flowers, my honeymoon with my sister as the bride. I smiled. My mother told me, and I'm quoting her, that I've always basically been the family checkbook, so I should just let my sister have her day. I let that land. I watched it land on 200 faces, watched them turn slowly toward my mother, my father, the bride, the groom. So I want to clear something up for all of you, I said, because it's a beautiful evening and you all deserve to know exactly whose evening it is. This venue, I booked it. The contract is in my name. The catering you just ate, the wine you're drinking, the flowers, the band, the photographer capturing all of this, every single one of those contracts is signed by me, Sloane Merritt, and paid for by me. $78,000, not 1 cent from the bride, the groom, or my parents. This entire wedding, legally and financially, belongs to me. I turned to my parents then, who were sitting frozen at the head table. Mom, Dad, you sat me down at your dining table 2 weeks ago, all of you, and you told me the mature thing, the loving thing, the family thing, was to pay for this and hand it over and smile. You called it being the bigger person. So I want you to watch, right now, in front of everyone you invited, exactly how big I can be. I looked back out at the guests. Because here's the part nobody at that table thought to check. The silence was enormous. And into it, my mother hissed, "Sloane, sit down," and Chase started to stand, and I held up one hand and kept going because I was not finished and they were going to hear all of it. "Now," I said, "you might be wondering why I would pay for the wedding of the man who cheated on me with my sister. And the answer is I didn't. I let you all believe I did for 3 weeks because I wanted everyone gathered in one place to understand something." I looked directly at Harper and at Chase. A wedding is not a thing that exists. It's a stack of contracts. And every contract here has my name on it, which means every contract here is mine to cancel, which I have done. I nodded toward the back of the property, where the venue coordinator was standing, professional and composed, having known this moment was coming because I had told her it would. The final payments for this evening, the balances owed to the venue, the caterer, the bar, the band, tens of thousands of dollars, were all scheduled to charge to my card. I canceled them this week. As of right now, nothing after this course is paid for. The contract holder, which is me, has ended the event. The venue has been extremely gracious about letting me choose the timing. Right on cue, the band stopped. Not mid-song. They simply, quietly stopped and began packing up because they too had been paid by me and instructed by me. A murmur of confusion rolled through the guests. "The bar is closing now," I said. "The catering ends with the plates in front of you. I'd enjoy that last glass while you have it." Chase was on his feet now, red-faced. "You can't do this, Sloane. This is insane. This is our wedding. You're embarrassing yourself. You're just bitter. He reached for the word, the family word, the one they'd all used my whole life. "You're being the checkbook about this, my God, can you not for once?" "You're right," I said, and I smiled at him, and I reached into my bag. "I have always been the checkbook. Everyone in this family has told me so, for years, and you most of all. You proposed to me, Chase, with this ring." I held it up, the beautiful ring, glinting in the October light, and I watched his face change as he realized which ring it was. "Which you bought on my credit card. You proposed to me with my own money, so I think it's only right that I give it back to the family that's earned it." And I dropped the ring into my sister's untouched champagne glass where it sank to the bottom, and I picked up my bag. "There's one more thing," I said to the whole crowd, but really to the two of them. "The honeymoon, 2 weeks on the Amalfi Coast. A villa in Positano over the bluest water you've ever seen. First-class flights, leaving tomorrow morning. I know Harper's been telling everyone about it." I smiled. "It's booked in my name, my passport. It always was, so I rebooked it. For one, I fly out at 9 a.m. I am going to stand on that cliff over that blue sea alone, and it is going to be the best 2 weeks of my life, because for the first time in 28 years, I will not be spending them paying for any of you." I set the microphone down on the table gently. "Congratulations on the marriage," I said. "You two deserve each other. The bars closed. Good night." For a moment, nobody moved. 200 people sat under the golden oaks in a silence so total I could hear the wind in the vines. And then it began to come apart. Exactly the way I'd arranged it to. The bartenders capped the bottles and rolled the bar away. The catering staff, who answered to the contract and the contract answered to me, began clearing the half-eaten plates whether people were finished or not. The band, already packed, carried their cases out across the lawn. The beautiful machine I had built was reversing itself in real time, gear by gear, in front of everyone, and there was nothing my mother's fury or Chase's shouting could do about it, because none of those people worked for them. They worked for the name on the contract. I saw a few faces in that crowd that I'll keep. An aunt of mine who had always been kind, on her feet, quietly applauding, just once with a fierce little nod. A college friend who caught my eye and mouthed go. Most of them just stared, doing the math, realizing they had spent the evening as guests at a wedding the jilted sister had paid for, and just repossessed in front of them, realizing the story they would be telling for years had just happened to them live. My mother was saying my name over and over like it was a spell that would undo things. Harper was holding her champagne glass with the ring still glinting at the bottom, frozen. Chase had stopped shouting and just looked, finally, like what he was, a man who had bet everything on someone else's checkbook and watched it walk out the door. And I walked out, across the golden vineyard I had paid for, past 200 stunned guests, past my white-faced mother and my silent father, past the bride fishing a ring out of her champagne and the groom shouting something I didn't bother to hear, and I got in my car, and I drove away from all of them, and I did not cry. I had done my crying on a kitchen floor 3 weeks before. What I felt, driving away, was the lightest I had felt in my entire life. I'd be lying if I told you the fallout was clean and simple, because betrayal is never clean, and the people who use you do not go quietly when the using stops. My phone, that night and for weeks after, was a war. My mother left voicemails that swung from fury to tears to fury again, calling me cruel, calling me vindictive, calling me a disgrace who had humiliated the family, never once in any message, acknowledging what had been done to me. My father sent a single text that said, "I hope you're happy with what you did," which told me everything about where my father had always stood, which was wherever my mother was standing. Harper sent screenshots of the venue bill, the unpaid balances the vendors were now coming to collect, with messages demanding I pay them because you ruined everything and this is your fault. Because even then, even after all of it, the assumption held, Sloane will get it, Sloane's the checkbook, Sloane will pay. I did not pay. That was the thing none of them could understand, the new and permanent fact they kept slamming into. I did not pay. The wedding I had canceled left real bills, and those bills belonged to the people who had 200 guests and no contracts, which was Harper and Chase. They had stood up in front of everyone and gotten married on the assumption that I would fund it, and the assumption was the only thing holding it up. And when I withdrew the assumption, it all came due on them. They started their marriage tens of thousands of dollars in debt to vendors, with a guest list full of people who had watched the whole thing collapse, and a story the entire extended family would be telling for the rest of their lives. I heard, much later, that the marriage was strained from the very first day, which is what tends to happen when a relationship that began as a betrayal has to survive without the steady supply of someone else's money to smooth it over. Chase, it turned out, was exactly as charming and exactly as broke with Harper as he had been with me, and Harper did not have a checkbook sister to cover the gap, because she was the checkbook sister now, except she had no money, so really there was just a gap. I take no pleasure in their unhappiness. I genuinely don't. But I won't pretend I lost any sleep over it either. They built a marriage on the assumption that I would always pay, and I simply stopped. And what was left was just the two of them and the truth of what they'd done. And I flew to Italy. I got on that plane at 9 the next morning, in my window seat over the Atlantic, alone, and somewhere over the ocean I started to laugh quietly to myself, the kind of laugh that has 3 weeks of grief underneath it. The man next to me probably thought I was unwell. I wasn't. I was, for the first time in as long as I could remember, free. The villa in Positano was everything I had imagined when I booked it alone at my kitchen table all those months ago. It clung to the cliff over water so blue it didn't look real. And in the mornings I drank coffee on the terrace and watched the fishing boats. And in the evenings I ate long dinners by myself and was not lonely, not even a little, because being alone is only lonely when you'd rather be with people who don't value you. And I was done with those people. I had spent 28 years being the checkbook for a family that mistook my generosity for my whole identity, and it took losing my fiancé to my sister to finally close the account. My phone followed me to Italy, of course. It buzzed on the terrace table that first morning while I drank my coffee and watched the boats. My mother's name lighting up the screen, then Harper's, then a number I didn't know that turned out to be a vendor, then my mother again. Voicemails stacked up like cordwood. I sat there in the early light with the blue sea spread out below me, and I looked at that buzzing phone, and I did something I had never once done in my entire life. I turned it face down, and then I turned it off, and I finished my coffee in a silence so complete and so chosen that I almost laughed out loud. For 28 years, that phone had been a leash. Every buzz was a need, a request, an emergency, a withdrawal, and I had answered every single one. Because answering was the job, because the checkbook is always on call. And sitting on that cliff over that impossible blue water, I understood that I got to decide now who reached me, that I had spent my whole life confusing being reachable with being loved, being useful with being valued, and that the most radical thing I could do was sit in the sun and let the people who only wanted my money discover that the money and the woman attached to it were no longer available. I left the phone off for 3 days. The sea did not need me to pay for it. The sun did not send an invoice. I had forgotten, somewhere in 28 years of being needed, that the world will give you things for free, that you are allowed to simply receive, that not every beautiful thing comes with a bill addressed to you. I made some decisions on that terrace, with the blue sea below me. I decided I was done being the family bank. Permanently. Not as revenge, but as sanity. The favors, the bailouts, the roof and the cars and the deposits and the rescues, all of it stopped because I finally understood that it had never bought me love. It had only bought me a role, and the role was costing me my life. When the requests came, and they kept coming for a while, the car trouble and the rent shortfall and the emergencies that were always emergencies, I said no. Just no. No explanation, no apology, no negotiation. It is a complete sentence, and I had never once used it with my family, and the first few times nearly killed me, and then it got easier, and then it got free. The first real test came about 2 months after Italy. Harper called me and I almost didn't pick up, but I did, and she was crying, and for a moment the old machinery in me lurched to life, the reflex of 30 years, the impulse to fix whatever was wrong. She and Chase were drowning, she said. The vendor debts, the rent, everything. They were going to lose the apartment. She was my sister. Family doesn't let family go under. And then, through the tears, she got to it the way they always get to it. Could I just help them out, just this once? Just to get back on their feet. She would pay me back. She knew things were complicated between us, but surely I wouldn't let her end up on the street, not over money, not when I had so much of it. I listened to the whole thing, and I noticed that even now, even after everything, the request came wrapped in the same assumption that had defined my entire life, the assumption that my money was a shared family resource, and my refusal of it was the only thing that could ever be cruel. Not the affair, not the wedding, not a year of lies. My saying no to a check, that was where cruelty lived in their math. And I realized that as long as I picked up that part of the call, as long as I treated it as a real question I had to find a kind way to answer, I would never be free, because there is no kind way to keep refusing an entitlement. You can only refuse it. So I said, no, Harper. Not no, but not no because just no. She waited for the rest of it, the explanation, the softening, the guilt that would let her keep negotiating. There wasn't any. I'm not going to do that, I said. I hope things work out for you. And I meant it in the way you mean it for a stranger, and I hung up, and I sat with the strange, terrible lightness of having finally done the thing I was raised to believe would make me a monster, and discovering that the sky did not fall. The only thing that fell was the roll, the checkbook. It just dropped out of my hands and shattered on the floor, and I stepped over it and walked on. I am still a wealth manager. I still read every clause. I still keep my binders and my spreadsheets, and I no longer let anyone make me feel small for it. Because the carefulness they mocked my whole life turned out to be the thing that saved it. The very quality my family reduced to a punchline, Sloane and her contracts, Sloane the checkbook, was the quality that meant that when they tried to take my wedding, my honeymoon, my dignity, every single thing was already quietly in my name. They thought reading the fine print made me cold. It turned out reading the fine print made me free. My family and I are not in contact much now. My mother has, in the time since, attempted several reconciliations, all of which somehow circle back to money, to how hard things have been, to whether I might help just this once, the way I used to. The answer is no. I love them in the complicated way you love the people who made you, from a distance, with a closed wallet and an open, finally peaceful heart. Harper and I do not speak. I wish her well the way you wish a stranger well. The sister I had was a person I invented out of hope, and you cannot mourn forever someone who was never really there. I kept the photos from Italy as my screensaver for a year. Me on the cliff, alone, the blue sea behind me, in the trip that was always only mine. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. The people who treat your generosity as your only value are telling you exactly how they see you, and you should believe them the first time. I let my family call me the checkbook for 28 years and told myself it was affection, and the cost of that lie was that they felt entitled to take everything from me and call it being the bigger person. Generosity given to people who only see your wallet is not love. It's a subscription they assume will never lapse. Read the fine print of your own life. Know what's actually in your name, what's actually yours, what you've actually built, because the day the people who underestimated you reach out to take it, the only thing that will protect you is having quietly, carefully, made sure it was yours all along. They will call you cold for it. Let them. Cold is just what warm people call you when you finally stop setting yourself on fire to keep them comfortable. That's my story. A stolen fiancé, a wedding I paid for and took back, a ring at the bottom of a champagne glass, and a cliff over a blue sea where I finally became a person instead of a checkbook. They thought the worst thing they could do to me was take my wedding. It turned out the best thing that ever happened to me was letting them try. If this reached something in you, tell me in the comments about the time you finally stopped being someone's checkbook, or the moment you realized you needed to. I read every one. And if you believe that the people who mistake your kindness for weakness deserve to find out exactly how wrong they are, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.